The HOA president stood at the edge of the dock, waving a neon yellow citation slip in my face like she just won a prize. "You've been fined $500 for unauthorized fishing," she snapped. Behind her, the lake sparkled under the afternoon sun, serene, almost taunting in its stillness while chaos brewed on the shore. A small group of HOA members stood nearby, grinning smugly. A few even had their phones out, recording my public humiliation. I could feel the heat rise in my chest. This dock had always been my haven, my escape from the world, and now it was being turned into a war zone. "Karen," the president, a sharp-featured and always on edgy, leaned in and whispered with venom, "if you can't respect our rules, maybe it's time you stayed away from the lake entirely." That hit me like a punch. I didn't say a word, but deep down, I made a quiet vow. They thought they were in charge. They had no clue what was coming. Just 2 months later, the same smug faces gathered in disbelief at the entrance to the lake property. The gates were chained shut, and a new sign hung boldly for all to see: "Private property, a lake access permanently revoked. Trespassers will be prosecuted." Cameras now watched every angle. And who did the land belong to? Me, the guy they tried to shame for fishing. Their jaws dropped as their eyes scanned the deed posted beneath the signal with my name printed in bold. Karen's face drained of all color. I stepped out from behind the gate, keys in hand, and said with steady calm, "Looks like the lake isn't yours anymore." The crowd exploded in outrage, yelling, questioning, threatening. Karen shouted, "You can't do this." I just turned the lock, ignored the chaos, and walked toward my cabin as fists pounded on the fence. My heart thudded in my chest, and not just from nerves, but from victory. You're probably wondering, how did it come to this? How did a regular guy like me end up owning the lake the HOA thought they ruled? Well, this is where the story begins. And no, it's not just about revenge. It's about standing up for what's right. But before I explain how it all happened, I want to know, where are you watching this from? Because maybe, just maybe, you've been through something like this too. I'm Mark Anderson, a 34-year-old carpenter with a love for fishing. This lake has always been my sanctuary, my breathing space after long workdays. I learned to fish here with my dad. Every cast brought back a piece of him. The HOA had rules less strict, sure, but manageable. Pay your dues, follow their signs, and they'd leave you alone. At least, that's what I believed. Karina, everyone knew her. She ruled the HOA like a queen with a clipboard. Always dressed in polished suits, pulling up in her spotless black SUV. Her husband Greg was more of a silent sidekick. Then there was Lisa, always filming everything, and Brian, who never spoke but nodded along to everything Karen decreed. They treated the HOA like their personal kingdom, and the rest of us were just subjects. The trouble began one sunny Saturday morning. I had just cast my line when Karen marched over with that ever-present clipboard. "Mark, you know fishing is only allowed from 10 to 4, and only on designated days," she snapped. I glanced at my watch. "It's 10:05. It's allowed," I replied, keeping my cool. But she wasn't there to check times. She was there to show off her authority. She handed me a fine anyway, citing some mystery rule passed during a secret board meeting. That's when it hit me, they were making it all up as they went. I tried to push back. They responded by doubling the fine, claiming I was being aggressive. I walked home that day, not angry about the money, but furious over the injustice. In the days after, I got letters threatening to revoke my access to the lake entirely. Neighbors began whispering. Karen would stand on her porch, watching me pass by with that smug look that said, "I win." But they didn't scare me. They lit a fire in me. I started digging up property records, public ownership documents, lease agreements. What I found floored me. The HOA didn't own the lake. The cabin and shoreline were actually private land, owned by an elderly couple who rarely came out. The HOA had only been leasing access. That's when the idea hit me. What if I bought it? What if I took away the one thing they used to control us? I began saving, sold off some of my tools, took on side jobs. Then one day at the hardware store, I saw Mr. and Mrs. Collins, the owners. They mentioned they were thinking of selling. The trips were getting too tiring. I barely slept that night. By morning, I made them an offer. They accepted. The moment the papers were signed, I drove straight to the lake with the deed in hand. I passed by the same dock where Karen had tried to humiliate me. This time, I smiled, The lake was mine, but I kept it quiet. For a while, I let them continue their little tragedy, issuing fines, puffing their chests, pretending to rule the place. I was waiting for the perfect moment. It came during their annual HOA barbecue by the lake. Burgers sizzled on grills. Neighbors laughed. Music played. I quietly placed a new sign at the gate. One by one, people noticed. Conversations stopped. Karen stormed through the crowd, yanked off her sunglasses, and shrieked, "Who put this here?" That's when I stepped out. Everything went still as I walked past the gate, unlocked it, stepped through, and secured it behind me. "Hope you enjoyed your last party here," I said. Chaos erupted. They yelled. They raged. But it didn't matter. The lake was mine now, and they were on the outside looking in. Greg, Karen's husband, stormed forward, his face flushed the color of rage. "You'll regret this, Mark," he growled. "You have no idea what we're capable of." Gasps rippled through the crowd. My grip on the keys tightened. Was that just a threat? Or a promise of something worse? Before I could answer, the wail of sirens cut through the air. Flashing red and blue lights danced across the treetops as police cars rolled in. Karen gave a smug little smirk. "Looks like your fun's over." Cheers erupted from the crowd as if justice was already theirs. Karen smoothed her blazer and leaned toward Lisa. "Record everything," she whispered. Lisa raised her phone like it was a weapon, capturing every second. Outwardly, I kept my composure. Inside, the pressure built like a ticking bomb. Two officers stepped out. One of HOA Officer Reynolds I recognized from around town. The other was unfamiliar. Karen rushed toward them like royalty addressing her loyal guards. "Officers," she cried, her voice full of fake distress, "arrest this man immediately. He's trespassing on HOA property and making threats." Reynolds furrowed his brow. "Trespassing?" he asked, pulling out his notepad. "Who owns the land?" Karen flung her arm toward the lake, full of confidence. "The HOA does. We oversee it. He's keeping us from our own property." The crowd rallied behind her, shouting accusations, fueling the drama. My heartbeat pounded, but I stood firm. Without a word, I reached into my backpack and unfolded a document. "Actually, officer," I said evenly, "I own this land." The crowd fell silent. I handed over the paperwork. Reynolds examined it carefully. His partner leaned in, eyes scanning every line. Karen's confident grin began to falter. After a long pause, Reynolds looked up and said, "Everything appears to be in order. According to these records, the lakefront and the cabin legally belong to Mark Anderson." Gasps echoed from the group. Someone muttered in disbelief, "No, why a broken bar?" Even Lisa's phone began to lower, as if she herself wasn't sure she wanted this recorded anymore. Karen turned a deeper shade of red. "This is fraud," she screeched. "He must have tricked the sellers or forged something." Reynolds handed the papers back to me calmly. "No fraud here, ma'am. Everything checks out. You and your board no longer have any access to this property unless Mr. Anderson says otherwise." Chaos erupted. Yelling, protests, and disbelief filled the air. Brian, the usually silent board member, muttered under his breath, "We need a lawyer." Greg glared at me with such intensity, it felt like he was trying to burn holes through me. "You fined me," I said, voice calm but pointed, "for fishing on land you didn't even own. You tried to humiliate me, and you thought I'd just roll over. Well, things are different now." Karen stepped forward, shaking with fury. "You can't lock out an entire neighborhood. This lake has always belonged to the community." I looked her dead in the eye. "Watch me." That moment was sweet of vindication. But I knew it was only the beginning. Karen stormed off, barking orders at the others to follow her. As they retreated, I could hear murmured threats and urgent whispers. I knew they weren't done. People like Karen don't just walk away. They regroup. They retaliate. Later that night, I sat on the porch of the cabin, staring out at the moonlit lake. The water was calm, but I couldn't shake the feeling that a storm was coming. My phone buzzed with messages from neighbors. Some congratulated me, others offered warnings. The following days were eerily peaceful. Too peaceful. I spent my time fixing up the cabin, painting the porch, cleaning up, breathing in the quiet. I even invited my old friend Jake to join me. We sat by the water, rods in hand, laughing like we used to. "Man, you really showed them," Jake said, chuckling. "But you better be careful. Karen doesn't forgive." and she sure as hell doesn't forget. He wasn't wrong. A week later, I discovered something that sent a chill through me. I stepped onto the dock one morning and spotted muddy footprints afresh. Not mine, and not Jake's either. My fishing gear, which I had left neatly packed, was in disarray. One rod was snapped clean in half, and on the wooden railing, someone had carved the words, "You'll pay." My chest tightened. Someone had broken in and they were sending a message. I raced to check the cameras I'd installed around the property. Nothing. The footage had been wiped clean. Whoever did this wasn't just angry. They were calculated, experienced. That night, every creak of the cabin floor made me flinch. The place that had always been my refuge now felt like a trap. The next evening, just as the sun was dipping behind the trees, I heard engines approaching. Gravel crunched under tires. I stepped outside and saw headlights slicing through the dusk. Multiple vehicles pulled in. Doors opened. Karen, Greg, and a handful of home members emerged, faces cold, expressions hard. Greg shouted, "This ends tonight, Mark." Karen stepped forward, something metallic gleaming in her hand. Her eyes burned with fury. "You really think you can humiliate us and walk away?" she hissed. "You've made a serious mistake." Karen spat, her voice low and venomous. I froze, heart pounding, as the group crept closer. There was a shift in the air. This wasn't just a confrontation. They hadn't come to argue. A sudden crash split the night. Glass shattered behind me. I spun around and saw shards from the cabin window raining onto the porch floor. My stomach turned to ice. They had crossed a line. The front door rattled violently as fists pounded against it. Shouts and insults rang out, echoing across the water. Karen's voice sliced through the noise. "Open the door, Mark, you can't hide forever." In her hand, something gleamed under the moonlight, a crowbar. Panic surged in my chest. I scrambled for my phone and dialed. My fingers shook as I pressed it to my ear. 911. "What's your emergency?" "There's a mob outside my cabin," I whispered urgently. "They've already smashed a window and they're armed." The operator assured me officers were en route, but every second stretched into eternity. I crouched near the back door, ready to slip out if they broke through. Some of my security cameras had been tampered with earlier, but a few were still functional enough to catch footage and trigger alerts to my phone. The intruders had no idea they were being recorded. Then came a loud crack. The front door splintered under a heavy blow. I heard Greg shout, "Harder, kick it open." My pulse thundered in my ears. And then headlights, sirens, flashing lights spilled across the property as two police cruisers tore up the driveway. The home members froze. Some backed away. Others glanced around in confusion. "Don't stop," Karen hissed, but even she sounded uncertain now. The cruisers screeched to a halt. Doors flew open. Officers jumped out with weapons drawn. "Step away from the door. Hands where we can see them." Karen dropped the crowbar. Her face turned ghostly pale. Greg raised his hand slowly, casting a hateful glare in my direction. The others stuttered, trying to explain, but the officers weren't listening. One by one, they were forced to the ground. Officer Reynolds spotted me peeking from behind the cabin. He motioned me over. "You all right, Mark?" I nodded, still shaking. "You got here just in time." A broken bar they were about to break in. Karen's voice rose from where she knelt in the dirt. "This is our lake. He stole it. We were only taking back what belongs to the community." Reynolds didn't flinch. "Ma'am, this is private property. You're trespassing and that window makes it vandalism." The cuffs clicked. Karen's fury turned to panic. Greg said nothing, but the intensity in his eyes said plenty. As the police cars pulled away, the group inside them, the night fell quiet again. Too quiet. I stood under the moonlight, staring at the shattered glass on the ground. My hands trembled, not just from fear but from disbelief that it had gone this far. In the days that followed, I worked to repair the damage. I boarded up the broken window, reinforced the doors, and replaced the cameras with more secure models. Jake came by again. We fixed the dock together, trying to bring some normalcy back. "They've lost it," he muttered. "But at least now it's on record. They're going to face consequences." I wanted to believe that, but I knew better. Karen wasn't finished. People like her don't surrender, they regroup. Sure enough, a week later, I received a thick envelope with the law firm's logo on it. My stomach dropped as I opened it. Inside was a letter from the HOA's attorney. The accusations hit like a punch. They were suing me. They claimed the sale of the property had been unlawful. They called the purchase unethical and demanded I hand it over to the HOA. If I didn't comply, they threatened a lawsuit that would drag me into court and drain me financially. I read the letter again and again. I couldn't tell if I wanted to scream or laugh. How far were they willing to go? The cabin, my safe place, suddenly felt like a burden. That night I sat on the porch again, staring out at the still water. It looked peaceful, like HOAs, but my thoughts were anything but. Then, just past midnight, a splash broke the silence. I jumped to my feet and grabbed a flashlight, aiming it toward the dock. In the beam of light, I saw someone flailing in the water, a figure half-submerged, desperately trying to stay afloat. Without hesitation, I bolted down to the shore. It was Lisa, the one who always had her phone out, filming for the HOA. She thrashed in the water, screaming, "Help, I can't swim." I dove in, the cold hitting me like knives. Fighting the current, I reached her and pulled her to shore. She collapsed on the ground, gasping and shivering. "Why were you in the lake?" I asked, breathless. She looked up at me, wide-eyed and terrified. "Karen sent me," she whispered. "She told me to plant something on your property, a broken bar, but I slipped." My blood turned cold. Plant something? Before I could ask what she meant, she passed out. And then, from the trees, movement. A silhouette stepped out from the shadows. I recognized it immediately. Greg. He moved slowly, clapping his hands mockingly. "You're a good man, Mark," he said, his voice low and chilling. "But kindness, a broken bar, that's going to be your downfall." My heart slammed against my ribs. Before I could respond, he turned and disappeared into the woods. The next morning, I awoke with a sense of dread that clung to me like fog. Sunlight trickled through the broken blinds. Every muscle ached. My thoughts raced back to Lisa's words. "Karen sent me to plant something, a broken bar." What were they trying to do? I stepped outside, hoping the fresh air would clear my head. The lake looked calm, like it had nothing to hide. But then, as I walked toward the dock, something caught my attention, as something that made my heart skip a beat. Fresh tire tracks in the mud. And they weren't mine. A fresh wave of panic hit me as I followed the tire tracks to the side of the cabin. That's where I spotted Ida, partially buried beneath the porch steps. A small, black duffel bag. Kneeling down, I tugged it free. My stomach turned. Inside were wads of cash, vacuum-sealed plastic bags filled with white powder, and a handgun. My hands began to shake. This wasn't a mistake. This was a setup. Someone had planted this to destroy me. If the police showed up and found this stash, I'd be finished. My first thought was to throw it into the lake to erase it all. But instinct held me back. I needed evidence, not impulsive action. I pulled out my phone and took photos from every angle. Then I carefully locked the bag inside my shed. Without wasting time, I called Officer Reynolds. "Don't touch it again," he told me, voice tight. "We'll send someone out immediately. This is serious." While waiting for them to arrive, I went back through my security footage. I'd recently added cloud storage to avoid another wipeout like before. And there it was, grainy, but unmistakable. Greg, creeping around the side of the cabin in the dead of night, carrying that same black bag. My stomach twisted. He meant what he said, that my kindness would be my downfall. And now I had proof he was acting on it. When Reynolds arrived, he reviewed the footage and examined the bag. His jaw tightened. "This has gone beyond HOA nonsense," he said. "This is criminal. We're opening a formal investigation." Compared to this, the HOA's threats and lawsuits seemed like schoolyard games. But I knew Greg and Karen wouldn't be deterred. They'd only escalate. The next few days were tense. One afternoon, Lisa showed up at my cabin, eyes red, cheeks streaked with tears. "I'm so sorry," she cried. "I didn't know it would go this far. Karen told me if I helped her, she'd wipe my overdue dues. I never thought anyone would get hurt. A broken bar." I assured her she did the right thing by telling the truth. But as she left, I caught a glimpse of a familiar black SUV parked just down the road. Greg, watching. I forced myself to keep working on repairs, but the constant feeling of being hunted never let up. That night, I sat inside by the fire, trying to shake the unease, when I heard the faint crunch of footsteps outside. The motion sensor pinged. Movement in near the dock. I grabbed my flashlight, opened the door quietly, and aimed the beam toward the shoreline. A dark figure crouched by the water. Greg. But he wasn't alone. 2 more men stood beside him, each holding crowbars. "Stay inside, Mark," Greg called out with a sneer. "This doesn't involve you. We're just reclaiming what's ours." Before I could speak, the trio began smashing the dock, wood splintering, nails screeching as planks were torn free. My blood boiled. I wanted to charge out there, to stop them, but I was outnumbered, and unarmed. I grabbed my phone and dialed the police. Greg saw me through the window and laughed. "Call whoever you want. This dock will be gone before they get here." The other 2 men jeered and kept destroying what had once been my peaceful refuge. But just when it seemed they'd finished the job, a commanding voice rang out from the trees. "Drop the tools." Hands in the air. Spotlights lit up the dock like a stage. Officers flooded the scene, weapons drawn. Greg and his crew froze, then reluctantly raised their hands. Reynolds stepped forward, his tone ice cold. "We've got you this time." As the men were cuffed, Karen burst from the shadows screaming, "You can't arrest us. This is our land. This isn't over, Mark." Her voice cracked with rage as she was pulled away, kicking and shouting. Greg glared at me, spitting on the ground. "You haven't seen the end of this." And then, they were gone, hauled off in the back of patrol cars. I stood there, shaken, heart racing. It felt like I'd won a battle. But I knew deep down the war wasn't over. The next morning, I walked to the dock to assess the damage. Boards were splintered, nails jutted out like teeth. I sighed and began planning the repairs when something strange caught my eye. Wedged between the destroyed planks was a piece of folded paper wrapped in plastic. I pried it loose. Inside, in large block letters, was a chilling message: "You have 48 hours to leave a broken bar or you won't live to see the sunrise." The breath left my lungs. This wasn't just harassment anymore. This was a death threat. And just then a bang. A gunshot cracked through the still air. Birds exploded from the treetops, shrieking into the sky. It came from the woods. Close. Way too close. The sound echoed across the lake, then vanished into a silence so heavy it pressed down on my chest. I dove behind the broken dock, heart hammering, eyes scanning the tree line. But whoever pulled that trigger was already gone. I crawled back to the cabin, low to the ground, adrenaline surging. My hands shook as I bolted every door, every window. Then I grabbed my phone and called Officer Reynolds again. "Someone just fired a gun near my cabin," I said, voice trembling. "We're dispatching a unit now," he replied immediately. "Stay inside, Mark. Don't open that door for anyone but us." The minutes that followed crawled like hours. Every creak in the floorboards, every rustle outside felt like a threat. Finally a headlights through the trees. Officers arrived, flashlights and K9 units sweeping the woods. But they found nothing. "Could have been a warning shot," Reynolds muttered, jaw tight. "We'll keep patrols nearby. Don't go anywhere alone." After they left, I sat by the fireplace, staring at the flame as knowing the fire outside wasn't over. It was just beginning. I sat by the fire, trying to steady my nerves, my mind drifting to my father's voice. He always told me, "Don't let bullies win. Stand your ground." That memory kept me rooted, kept me from packing up and leaving. The next day, my friend Jake came over the moment he heard what had happened. "This is insane," he muttered, pacing back and forth. "You should just sell this place and walk away." I shook my head firmly. "That's exactly what they want. I'm not letting them take my dad's lake from me." Jake let out a long breath but eventually nodded. "All right then, we fight smarter." We spent the entire day reinforcing the cabin. Stronger locks, brighter motion lights, extra cameras with backup storage. For the first time in days, I felt like I had a little control back. But it was just an illusion. Around 2 a.m., the motion lights flared on. My phone buzzed a camera alert. I tapped the screen and froze. There was Karen, standing by the gate, holding a red gas can. My heart lurched. I grabbed my phone and whispered urgently to Officer Reynolds, "She's here. She has gasoline." On the screen, I watched her pacing like a predator, pouring fuel along the fence line. Then she struck a match. Before she could throw it, flashing lights burst onto the scene. Sirens howled. Police cruisers tore into view. Officers shouted commands. Karen dropped the match and screamed as they tackled her to the ground. She was arrested right there, screaming, fighting, kicking. "You'll regret this, Mark," she shrieked as they shoved her into the back of a cruiser. "You'll regret ever crossing me." The next morning, the neighborhood buzzed with gossip. People whispered about Karen's arrest, some clearly on my side, others scared silent, unsure what would come next from the HOA. Just when I thought maybe things might settle down, I found a black envelope on my porch. No name, no stamp, just a single line inside: "She may be gone, but I'm still here." I felt my chest tighten. Greg. That evening, as the sun dipped below the trees, I heard a low humming in the distance. It grew louder, closer. I stepped outside and spotted 2 drones circling above the lake, hovering around my cabin like vultures. Their red lights blinked as they scanned the property. One drone dipped lower, almost teasing me, then released something metallic into the water. It hit with a splash and disappeared beneath the surface. The other zipped off into the woods. I sprinted to the dock, flashlight in hand, and shined it into the water. Bubbles surfaced, and a harsh chemical odor hit me in the face. My stomach dropped. They were trying to poison the lake. Then, behind me, I heard fast footsteps on gravel, someone coming toward the cabin. I turned, but the darkness swallowed everything. All I saw was a blur moving toward the house, and then a total blackness. The lights in the cabin went out. Everything fell silent. The steady chirping of the crickets vanished, replaced by the hammering of my heart. My flashlight shook in my grip as I swept the beam across the yard. Nothing, only swaying trees. And then a crunch, gravel, under deliberate footsteps. I froze. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice raw with fear. No reply, just the sound of those steady, closing steps. I backed up until I hit the cabin wall, trapped like prey. My phone vibrated with another alert, but when I checked the screen and nothing but static. The cameras had been jammed. Then I heard his voice, low, cold, mocking. "You can't hide forever, Mark." My flashlight caught his face for a brief second. Greg, eyes like ice, twisted smile, and in his hand, something metallic. A crowbar. "Or worse." "You should have left when you had the chance," he said, stepping forward. "You think owning this place makes you safe? This lake was ours long before you showed up." My hands were trembling, but I stood tall. "It was never yours, Greg. You bullied this whole neighborhood into silence. That ends now." He let out a laugh, chilling and humorless. "Ends?" "Mark, broken bar, this is just beginning." Before I could move, he lunged. I swung my flashlight instinctively, smashing it against his arm. He grunted and stumbled back. I didn't wait. I sprinted to the door, slammed it shut, and locked it tight. He pounded against it, shouting threats. As I fumbled for my phone, fingers shaking, I barely managed to dial 911. "What's your emergency?" "He's here, Greg. He tried to break in." "He's outside right now," I stammered. "Stay where you are. Units are en route," the dispatcher instructed. "Do not open the door." I crouched near the window, peering through the curtains, heart racing. Greg was pacing outside like a wolf. Then he stopped, looked straight at me through the glass, and smiled. "You can't call the cops forever, Mark," he said, almost gently. "One day, they won't come fast enough." Greg melted into the woods just as the sound of approaching sirens echoed through the air. By the time the police arrived, he had already vanished. The officers swept through the area, but once again, Greg had disappeared without leaving a single clue behind. Officer Reynolds lingered after the others cleared out, his expression dark. "He's escalating, Mark," he said. "You really need to think about staying somewhere else for a while." I shook my head. "I'm not backing down. This place is mine now." Reynolds exhaled slowly. "Then prepare yourself, because he's not going to let this go." The next few days were filled with tension. I barely got any sleep, startled by every noise, convinced eyes were watching me from the shadows. Jake came to spend the night once, but even he admitted the place felt a broken bar haunted. And the drone as if they kept coming back, circling high above the trees, blinking red lights glowing like angry stares. Despite the constant dread, I kept working repairing the dock, fixing the cabin, refusing to be chased off. I added floodlights and set up an alarm system to alert me the second someone stepped foot on the property. Then something unexpected happened. Elisa came back. She looked completely drained, her face pale and eyes hollow, like she hadn't rested in days. "I need to talk to you," she said, glancing nervously over her shoulder before stepping inside. She sat down at the table, hands trembling. Greg broken bar, this isn't just about the lake. He's involved in things that go way deeper. That bag you found? It wasn't just a setup. He was storing something for people who don't tolerate mistakes. My stomach dropped. What kind of people? She hesitated, then leaned in close and whispered, the kind that make people disappear. I didn't know what to say. Then she slid a small USB drive across the table. This has proof of videos, texts, the works. Keep it safe. I picked it up, staring at it like it was a live grenade. Why give this to me? Tears welled up in her eyes. Because I'm tired of living in fear, and because he broken bar, he's planning something. Tomorrow night. I leaned forward. What is he planning? Her voice broke. He's going to burn the cabin, with you in it. The words hit like ice in my veins. But before I could ask anything else, a loud bang rattled the walls. We both jumped. Outside, the motion lights flared. The security cameras lit up. I checked the feed. My blood turned cold. A group of masked men had gathered at the gate. They held gas cans and lit torches. They're early, Lisa whispered, visibly shaking. My heart pounded in my chest. The men began scaling the fence, flames dancing in the night air. I stuffed the USB drive into my pocket and turned to Lisa. Hide in the shed. Don't come out until I tell you. She ran as I bolted the door shut. They were at the cabin now, hammering on the walls, shouting, laughing. One voice rose above the rest. Greg's. Time's up, Mark. We warned you. The smell of gasoline seeped into the cabin as they doused the perimeter. My fist clenched. This was it. Just as one of them lowered a torch to the ground, sirens erupted louder and closer than ever before. Floodlights swept through the darkness as multiple police SUVs tore onto the property. Officers leapt out, weapons drawn. The masked men scattered like startled animals, but Greg stood firm, torch still in hand, face twisted with fury. This isn't over, he bellowed as officers wrestled him to the ground. Even as they cuffed him, his voice carried, chilling and bitter, you think you've won? You have no idea who you're messing with. They arrested every last one of them that night, but the fear didn't leave. I sat on the porch until sunrise, the USB drive clenched tight in my hand. When Officer Reynolds returned, he eyed the drive. Whatever's on that broken bar, it could explain everything, he said. I handed it over, and as he turned to leave, he paused. If Greg was tied to something bigger, broken bar, this goes beyond the HOA. The next morning, just as sunlight broke over the lake, my phone rang. Reynolds. His voice was sharp. Mark, I need you at the station, right now. What we found on that drive, it changes everything. I grabbed my keys and headed to the truck, unaware that hidden eyes were still watching me from the trees. As I started the engine, something caught my eye, a red dot on the cabin wall, a laser sight. It vanished the second I noticed it, but my pulse was already racing. I killed the engine and ducked behind the truck door, scanning the tree line, heart pounding. The woods were quiet, birds chirped faintly in the distance. But whoever had been watching me had already disappeared, fading back into the forest like a ghost. Every instinct told me to run, but I wouldn't give in. I slid into the driver's seat and sped toward the station, constantly checking the rear-view mirror. A black SUV followed, keeping just enough distance to not be obvious, but I knew I was being tracked. When I arrived, Officer Reynolds was waiting outside. He ushered me into his office and locked the door behind us. His face was ashen. Mark, he said quietly, you have no idea what you've uncovered. He plugged in the USB drive. The screen flickered to life with grainy video footage of Greg in some warehouse, handing over packages to masked men, large stacks of cash, shady deals. Then came the messages of threats, warnings, encrypted conversations, text messages, detailed threats to those who owed money, explicit orders to silence anyone who got in their way. This isn't just about Greg and Karen, Reynolds said grimly. He's connected to a much larger criminal ring. We're talking illegal weapons, narcotics, extortion, and they've been using the lake area as a major drop zone. My gut twisted. That's what they were hiding beneath the dock, isn't it? Reynolds gave a solemn nod. Exactly. You purchasing that land disrupted their entire operation. Now they want you gone for good. I swallowed, trying to keep calm. So what happens now? We're putting you under protection, he said. But listen, Marka, this runs deep. Whoever Greg's working for a broken bar, they're not going to let this go. That lake is too valuable to them. Before I could reply, the overhead lights in the station flickered. Reynolds turned to the window, his brows furrowed. A dark van had pulled up outside. Two men in black stepped out cautiously, scanning their surroundings. "Stay here," Reynolds instructed, already moving toward the door. But the moment he stepped out, the building's alarm began wailing and then gunfire cracked through the air outside. I dropped to the floor behind the desk as glass shattered above me. Officers yelled out commands as they returned fire. Then, just as suddenly as it started, everything went still. Reynolds burst back in, a cut on his arm bleeding. "They came for the drive," he said, breathless. "We're moving you now." I followed him out, nerves raw. As officers secured the scene, they loaded me into an unmarked vehicle and we drove deep into the woods, far from the lake, far from anything familiar. But even there, I felt exposed, like someone was still watching. That night, alone in the remote cabin, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number flashed across the screen. "You can run, but not forever. The lake will burn, and so will you." Ice flooded my veins. I showed Reynolds the message the next time he checked in. His face hardened. "They're not bluffing," he said. "We need to go on the offensive via strike before they strike again." We decided to turn the lake into a trap. If they wanted it badly enough, we'd use it to draw them out. Reynolds organized a special task force and set up covert surveillance around the property. Hidden cameras, agents and plainclothes in the works. It was risky, but it was the only way. The following evening, under a crimson sunset, I returned to the lake with Reynolds and a small team of undercover officers. The air was thick with tension, as though the lake itself was bracing for something. We took our positions, staying low and silent near the cabin. Hours crawled by. Then, under the pale moonlight, headlights pierced the darkness. Several black SUVs crept onto the property, engines rumbling. Men in masks poured out armed, moving in formation. Clearly professionals. I held my breath as they began splashing gasoline around the cabin. Greg was with them, shouting commands, his face twisted with rage. "Burn it down, everything. Leave nothing." Reynolds gave the signal. Suddenly, floodlights blasted on, washing the intruders in blinding white light. "Police, drop your weapons," came the thunderous command as officers surged in from every angle. Gunfire erupted instantly. I hit the deck behind the porch railing, heart hammering, the crack of bullets deafening around me. Smoke and the acrid scent of gunpowder filled the air. Chaos reigned. Greg tried to make a run for it, but Reynolds tackled him hard. The rest of the attackers were overwhelmed, brought down one by one until the last of them was cuffed. As the sirens wailed and backup arrived, Greg was dragged past me, snarling, "This isn't over, Anderson. You'll never be safe." I stood frozen, chest heaving, staring out at the lake. Its surface shimmered under the moonlight and untouched by the fire they had tried to unleash. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't dared hope for. Relief, maybe even peace. But as Reynolds clapped a hand on my shoulder, his radio crackled to life. "We've picked up chatter," came a voice over the comms. "Someone higher up is coming. The property's still a target." I looked back at the lake, so calm on the surface, but hiding something deeper. We'd won the battle, just stories. But the real war, a broken bar, it was just beginning. Then, from across the water, a single flare soared into the night sky, bursting into a red bloom of fire. It hadn't come from us. It was a signal. Someone else was out there. Someone still watching.